Okay, we are going to discuss and have a conversation for another 30 minutes, and I hope that you're very attentive and please note down what you want to ask at the end of the panel. And as I had said before, when we when we first gathered here, the first way to reconnect problems and solutions is to provide examples. So I'm going to begin with the order in which we're seated, and we're going to ask each one of the ministers to please remember one natural disaster that you had in your country and to make an assessment of how this was managed and what was learned, what was the good thing, what was the bad thing previously in each one of them. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, all of you. And the the focus on disaster has to be seen not just what nature is generating, but what we human beings generate. In my experience, as a commissioner of the permanent commission of the contingencies in Honduras in the last 4 years in Honduras, I believe the strongest was the fire in the jail in Ciudad of Cumbayagua. 360 Hondureños lost their lives there, and this initiated a chain of complexity of care that we needed, because we needed to take care of the victims who were still alive. We needed to take care of the people who were in the hospitals, and their relatives who had people inside the jail, and we also had to take care of the carbonized cadavers, the bodies. And also we had another fire in the markets of the capital, where several stalls in the marketplace disappeared in a matter of 2 hours, and we also had to manage the crisis of being able to reconstruct this and reactivate and rehabilitate this. The human drama that you live in one of these kinds of situations is very hard to understand, especially when you are with people who have lost absolutely everything they have, and people who have perhaps been in previously who have been estranged from their relatives because they were in jail. So to manage this whole cycle that has to do with taking care of these people, we had to set up a camp that was open for 96 days, and it was called Hope Campamento Esperanza, and where we had to take care of people, psychological aid, food, clothing, and all of that, to 1,600 relatives of them who were waiting for their relatives to leave the morgue. But it was also saturated because they couldn't overcome. And thanks to the friends from different countries, we were able to Chile, Peru, Mexico. I'm sorry, Mr. Minister, even though this is not directly a natural disaster, I think it's important because of the fire that was set afterwards. Please, can you explain to us the construction details of the marketplace, because you probably learned something about the materials that had been used, because if I'm not wrong, the fire was disseminated precisely because of the materials that were probably flammable. What did you learn from that, and what changed after that? Well, in this kind of constructions, the service was the fire was caused by by a stove that was ignited and then inflamed the plastic stall that was next to it, and this is what caused the fire. So these are the things that we have tried since then to have in the construction building codes, to have a strict compliance with the new norms, and for fire prevention, that has to be foreseen and supervised as well, in terms of the pipes and all that. This was not just a hurricane, an earthquake, or a tremor, but there are different scenarios. What about the construction code? Was that changed specifically after the disaster? There was one that had been implemented in 2010, but there were new elements inserted into that, and then they put this as a cross-section element in different things to be more efficient. It was a very strong effort, and we have a national system for risk management, and we are now trying to pass a new law that will help people who, that will include people who are lower income families. Ms. Rodriguez, Minister from Argentina, you are from the Defense Security Ministry. It is different in Argentina, right? Security and defense, yes, we have different ministries. Well, from the point of view of security, what have you, experiences have you lived through and that have served you in general? In fact, it's a pleasure to be here. From my position right now, I am, thank you, and I have to, with due respect to the superintendent of Santa Fe, who gave a beautiful presentation about Santa Fe in this regard, I must say that I choose to mention the hydric emergency in Santa Fe in 2003, basically because the disaster, this of the flood, we had the rivers flooded, and we had half the population affected, the most vulnerable, and then the middle class as well. At that time, allow me to mention this a personal digression. I was there at the emergency response in 2003 as a member of the UNCTAD of the UN organization to work there. The organization of the response on a provincial, municipal, and national levels was there, constituted then because of the hydric disaster. There was no other way of all of these agencies to be able to coordinate a response, an effective and efficient response. In 2003, we had just been from a economic, social, and political crisis in Argentina, important ones. And I think that in order to go to your question, when we were when we discussed the risk management issue, we cannot but think of economic development that we have to lead in our countries. In the last few years, our development, our economic development, has basically uh, been directed towards inequality, economic inequality, social inequalities, educational inequalities. And I think that at the center of our public policy, and I'm going to explain why it is security, but in our public policy for risk reduction, that is a cross-section of several ministries of the national cabinet. The axis is specifically on the inclusion and economic development in our country, with inclusion and decrease of inequalities, and because inequalities increase vulnerabilities, and from another point of view, it also generates other problems. But how did you fight against inequality? By coordinating. I was saying this was a process. I wanted to explain the emergency of 2003 as a response that was totally inefficient, and today, 10 years later, from this policy with development and with inclusion, Santa Fe has been able to explain all the strategic plan that has developed since, and how at the national level the government has in all of these areas, and how the Ministry of Education coordinates, and but the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education, and Social Development and Health, there are several areas that are cross-sectional that have improved, and so the same emergency and that has been dealt with in a more efficient way. And now our response today, there are several problems, but our emergency response is completely different from then, and it's more effective and more solidary than the one we used to have in 2003. And I chose 2003 experience because the parameters of the inclusive policies of greater investment in education and several tools of social policies have contributed to vulnerability and have improved the risk management on a local and provincial level. I have another question, but since you said that 2007 you have other characteristics because of the flood of the rivers, the number of victims versus the between comparing 2003 and 2007, what's the difference? The event was different because one was flood and the other one was an emergency because of rainfall, and then too much rain in a very short time, and that's what created this problem. And there weren't that many victims in 2007. I not only want to mention this, but also the coordination and efficiency in the responses and better structures to face the adverse events. And from the Ministry of Security in our country, which is a federal country with 23 provinces and 4,000 municipalities, the effort of coordination and articulation of the cross-sectional areas in the three levels of government. Thank you. Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, you are the Minister of Finances and you manage money, as Dr. Margarita was mentioning. What example can you give us in the challenge of having managed the budget to be able to handle a catastrophe of that sort? How can you tell us something about it? Primeramente me gustaría decir que uno de los ministros de Finanzas y Economía y los que somos de países de la mancomunidad estamos familiarizados con la terminología, y cuando yo llegué a este panel estoy llegando a la hora número 23 y espero hacerle honor a los presentes aquí.
Because of where Trinidad and Tobago is located geographically, we are on the fringe of the hurricane belt. And there is a phrase in Trinidad and Tobago that God, Trini, I said that this morning. So we have escaped what I would call major hurricanes or earthquakes and so on, although we are located on the seismic faults. The last major hurricane I could recollect that hit Trinidad and Tobago was in 1963, even before I was born. But within the last 2.5 years, there have been what I would call, because of heavy rainfall, a lot of landslide and mudslides occurring in the northern part of the country, concentrated in areas such as Diego Martin and Maraval. And 2 persons would have died, and a large amount of slush and mud and so on came in or crashed down on people's homes, rocks, boulders, and so on. A number of homes were taken over by the amount of slush and mud. And then you had a number of drainage being drains blocked and so on. So from that angle, there were challenges in relation to coordination between, let us say, the ministries of National Security, the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, and also to get the presence of the Ministry of the People and Social Development and the Ministry of Health that was supposed to look after the social concerns of people when there are such situations. And in addition to that, whilst you had the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management on the ground, coordinating operations and so on, at the local level, you had what would have been termed the Diego Martin Regional Corporation. This is what we would call the first responders to such a situation. In terms of the capacity, the manpower, the equipment that was needed to clear roads, remove debris from major water courses and so on, the geography of the area was as such that you had to deal with a lot of narrow roads, small roads, and so on. And it was, especially in the Dogomatin Maraval area, what we would call housing occurring on the hillsides and so on. So to get this specialized equipment, to get this specialized manpower and so on in these areas took some time. And as I said, at the local government level, the specialized equipment were not readily available, let us say, within the first 6 hours of the mudslide, landslides occurring. And the government, through the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, had to mobilize some of the larger contractors, private sector contractors within the country to bring in equipment to support what was there existing at the level of local government, and also from the point of view of what was existing, because the Army too was called into what we would call the engineering corps or battalion of the Army was called into action.